All right, welcome back, everybody. Today I have a special training for you guys. I'm thrilled to welcome my longtime friend and colleague, Dan Krassenstein. Welcome, Dan. How are you doing today?
Hey Gary, doing great. How about you?
I'm doing excellent. So Dan is kind of like one of the most experienced supply chain people that I know. Dan and I actually we first connected way back in Shanghai when we were both there in the 2000s and the 2010s, and we worked together also on the American Chamber of Commerce Supply Chain Committee. And Dan, he has a wealth of experience with 40 years international manufacturing, logistics experience, ocean carrier management, freight forwarding, trucking, warehousing, consolidating. And on top of that, he's also an adjunct professor. And then he's currently the global supply chain director at Procom Pacific, managing teams all over Asia, India, and he recently relocated to Portugal after many years in China. He's fluent in Mandarin and Spanish. He has a master's in global supply chain management. So this is a very sharp dude. He's like one of the people when he talks about sourcing and supply chain, I listen. So, Dan, it's great to have you with us. To kick things off, we're kind of like in rapid changing mode right now. And as everybody knows, the tariffs, they were up 145% on China. And now, currently in 90 days, they're dropped. But I saw on LinkedIn, you had a post just recently about your next prediction before Labor Day. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your next prediction, like going forward so far?
Sure, Gary, and thanks for having me on the Seven Figure Seller Summit training video, if that's what you're calling it. All power to you. So essentially, we're in a new dynamic, and that is rapid fire changes. Get ready for not only because of President Trump, but just of the era we're in. Changes just like global warming, where you can have a sunny day today and then a torrential downpour tomorrow where you least expect it. Same with global supply chain. Changes are happening so quickly. If you're not knees bent, basketball position, ready to defend, you're going to get knocked over. So you got to be agile. You have to be ready for a volatile environment from every different angle, from your supplier, from your forwarder, from weather to war to cyber, you name it. There's going to be so many disruptions, you're going to get dizzy. So if you're not built for it, get out of the industry or get yourself adjusted or hire people who can help you to make sure you are agile because things are no longer status quo. It's not your grandpa's importing business anymore. So, with that said, uh, about 2 weeks ago, I was already predicting that the 145% tariffs that Trump had placed on top of duties on China, that it wasn't sustainable, that there would be negotiated down. I had predicted down to 50%. At the moment, I think it's down to 30%, depending on your commodity and your harmonized tariff code, whether it's subject to additional tariffs, whether it's subject to duty changes, et cetera. But at minimum, it's down to around 30%. Great. That's better than I expected. What I don't want people to do is be complacent and thinking that, okay, it's all said and good. We're back to old US buying from China because we're gone. Those days are gone. Also, understand the motivation of why the Trump administration settled so quickly with China. China was thrilled. China got what it's wanted. It didn't budge. So China proved it can negotiate and play hardball with the Trump administration, number one. Trump was under a lot of pressure from US retailers and economists to quickly get this thing resolved under pretty much any circumstances. And face saving, he can say, okay, I got it to 30%, would be better than it was. And China dropped ours more. So I win. My negotiating tactics win. So Trump saves face. Fine. But here's what you got to understand. Trump is like a kid on the playground. He moves on to the next toy very quickly. He doesn't keep a tight attention span. So now that he has this one solved, he's already on to new things. Next will probably be UK and India and the next deal he's going to cut, other than the fact that he's
You
in
know,
Saudi Arabia right
Japan,
now.
Japan,
Oh, sure. Sure.
you know,
And Korea, you name it, it's going to keep going.
you know.
And
Mhm,
of course, you'll especially see Taiwan on there as well.
mhm.
So the point being is, he wanted to get this resolved. He was under pressure to get um, stores stocked up by Christmas, and now it's kind of the deadline. You got to do it now, otherwise you're not going to make it in time. He got that
Yeah.
resolved, and you can
Hmm.
see the effects on the exchange rates, you can see the effects on the stock market. Everybody's thrilled. However, less than 90 days from now, when that deadline is approaching, where he's got to make a decision to keep it at 30% or take it back where it was or somewhere in between, if nothing gets negotiated, my personal prediction is bad news, that it's going to get worse, that he resolved the short-term crisis, which is Christmas. Now that that's resolved, and he can get some other feathers in his cap with other trade deals and other
Hmm.
peace deals from Saudi Arabia to Syria to you name it. He's
Hmm.
going to be distracting the American public with other good news. And look what I've done for you lately, to his fellow Republicans. Look, I'm going to get you reelected or elected in the midterms and keep control of Congress. So that's what he's focused on. China for him will remain the boogeyman. So he will be going after China again. The question is when and how. Hopefully, the fentanyl crisis gets resolved, because that's a serious crisis in America after the
Right.
opioid crisis with OxyContin onto fentanyl. That's a very, very sad and serious issue. I hope one of the good things that comes out of this is, in fact, preventing some of the precursors to creating fentanyl, whether it's in China or Mexico, and cracking down on that, which is great. I'd like to see that happen. That's perhaps irrespective of trade, but it's quite critical. So again, back to your point, I do expect this to be a quick 90-day fix. So if
Hmm.
you have to hurry and build up your stock and bring an inventory until the next crisis hits, hurry up, get it done now, because I don't think it's going to last. And if you don't have a secondary sourcing market like a Vietnam or India or Mexico or elsewhere, get your act in order and quickly read the tea leaves and get your plan B in order now.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are like three huge points you just made, Dan. First is you're predicting that this is going to get worse. And second, your advice is for small businesses, we're talking mainly to e-com business owners, Amazon sellers. Hurry up, get your imports done now from China, and then also look at a secondary sourcing um, country. So let's unpack that a little bit. When you say your prediction, bad news, things are going to get worse around the 90-day mark, what do you think is going to happen in your crystal ball?
Well, it won't be 30%.
Hmm.
It's going to be, it all depends on what China does. If
Hmm.
China suddenly reinstates all the Boeing airplane orders, makes huge purchases of LNG, other type of fuels, American crops,
Hmm.
and puts in safeguards against IP infringement, cuts the fentanyl, does and perhaps leans on its neighbors from North Korea to Iran and perhaps stop being so supportive of Russia with its war with Ukraine, things that the US wants to see happen politically, geopolitically.
Hmm. Hmm.
I could see Trump therefore cutting a deal. And I hope I'm wrong. I hope that happens and everybody's honky dory and
Yeah.
I'm just I'm the one who's saying the sky is falling and I'm completely wrong with egg on my face. Thrilled to
Hmm.
be that guy. But
Hmm.
from my experience and my observations of the Trump administration, I don't see it. Once he
Yeah.
declares a boogeyman, he doesn't let up. And China
Yeah.
is his boogeyman. That's not going to change.
Yeah, yeah, we're seeing like it runs really deep with
Yeah.
that respect. Okay, let's
But
move on
but but
to
bear,
yeah,
let's just jump in. Sorry, let me bear in mind
yeah,
why. It's
hmm,
not just that Trump is pig-headed and he's focused on China as the boogeyman. No, it's
hmm,
his constituents. He
hmm,
really does placate to his MAGA type of supporters and also the non-MAGA who believe in his policies. They might think he's a bit of a clown, but they support his policies.
yeah,
Well, if he comes out with these wins of controlling fentanyl, of controlling Iran and North Korea and Russia, and a more fair trading, his constituents will support him to cut a deal with China. If on any one of those they don't, his constituents won't want him to cut a deal with China, and he reads his audience very well.
right, right. Okay, excellent. So going on to the second big point, your advice to hurry up and get it done now. So, I mean, obviously we have the 90-day window, but at the same time, it looks like the freight routes they're getting clogged up, with the supply and demand. Like, what if you were, let's say, I know you're not an e-commerce, business person, but what would your general advice be, given this latest development? Should they just rush to place orders in the 90-day window, or is there more strategy involved?
Both. Yes, rush to place orders.
Hmm.
Hopefully, I'm assuming a lot of US importers already have a lot of orders with
Yeah.
inventory, which is already built up in the go down or the warehouse in stock at the factory in China, for example.
Hmm.
Ship it immediately. Get it moving.
Yeah.
Because
Okay.
now's your window to get it here. But bear in mind, my reading of this 90-day rule, it's
Hmm.
not based on when it's on the water. It's based upon when it physically arrives to the US port and the customs entry is made. I might be wrong. Double check me on that. Make
Hmm.
sure you talk to your customs broker and read the rules under this new terms of agreement. When
Yeah.
is that 90-day deadline? Is it upon arrival? If it's on arrival, think about this. Where we are today, when we're filming this, it's May 14, right?
Yeah.
So typical transit time from a typical China port to a typical US port by ocean is, let's call it 3 weeks, give or take. You got to get it to the port. You got to get it onto the ship. A lot
Yeah.
of those vessels are out of position right now because we've had a couple weeks of blank sailings. So where are those vessels right now? Are they in position? Are they just anchored outside of Shanghai and Ningbo and Yantian ready to go? Oh, probably not. And
Mhm.
there's going to be such a surge of demand over the next 3 weeks of all this stock, which is sitting in China right now. Those
Right.
vessels are going to be the vessel is going to be chock block full. And to get
Right.
on it, you're going to have to displace somebody else's cargo. How do you do that? You're going to pay more freight. So getting onto a ship in the next few weeks, dealing with blank sailings, dealing with overloaded vessels will be challenging. So make sure your carrier or forwarder understands of these 12 containers I have, these two are my hottest. Treat them as your biggest priority, and I will pay whatever I need to plus 500. In other
Mm.
words, you're not gonna have a perfect world where you're paying the low freight, the fastest speed, and it's not gonna fail. No, you got to pick and choose. Now is the
Yeah.
time where you pay a premium, you get on that ship, and do your math to see does the duty savings versus the freight savings help or hurt you. The net cost has to make sense, and if it does, now's the time to ship it because
Yeah.
I'm predicting the vessel space out of China to US will be extremely tight, surge of demand with
Mm.
uncertain capacity over the next month.
Mm.
As you get closer and closer to that 90-day window, it might get better, it might get worse. We just can't predict. That's what I'm saying. If you're into mitigating risk, ship ASAP.
Mm. That's great advice. All right. So let's talk a little bit about sourcing away from China. And Dan,
Mhm.
obviously, you have a lot of experience sourcing from India and other countries right now. So let's do a quick comparison because I think a lot of sellers, they're looking at other countries, including India. So India versus China reality. You've worked extensively in both markets. What are, let's say, the three biggest differences you've experienced between sourcing in India versus China?
Start with logistics. Physically on a map, you got to take a map out and see where is India and where is China, and then where is the US with respect to the two. You'll notice that India is closer to the US East Coast, China's closer to the US West Coast. And that's exactly how the ocean carriers look at it.
Hmm.
Thus, cargo out of India is routed previously through the Suez Canal, hopefully someday in the future, but presently under the Cape of Good Hope, over the Atlantic Ocean into typically New York, Norfolk, Charleston, Savannah. Those are your key ports. You might hit Halifax on the way, you might add a Jacksonville, but more or less it's New York, Norfolk, either Savannah or Charleston or both, right?
Hmm.
Whereas China typically will go to an LA Long Beach, maybe a Tacoma, Seattle, and perhaps even an Oakland. And then it might go Panama Canal, all water to either the Gulf or to US East Coast, right? So with China, you're more West Coast focused. With India, you're more East Coast focused. Understand as well because of the Suez Canal and the Houthi rebels and the closure of the Red Sea, and nobody really being certain when that's going to safely reopen, I'm predicting Q1 2026, no sooner. Although there might be some vessels like a CMA making some earlier routings, but not too much in the container traffic yet. My
Hmm.
point being is that what had been a 3 to 3.5 week transit time from a Mundra, Narashiva, west coast of India into New York, today's more in the 35 to 40 day range, subject to change. meaning that there's delays all along the way. You might have a transshipment which misses. You could have bad weather under South Africa, many variables at play. Thus,
Hmm.
your transit times are longer and more
Hmm.
variable from an India to United States versus a China to United States, where it's just a straight shot, no transshipment, a Shanghai and Ningbo, a Yantian straight into LA. It could
Yeah.
be as fast on like on a Matson, it could be as fast as even 12 days, even from a
Yeah.
Shanghai into LA. Whereas
Yeah.
typically it's much faster, less variable. Next one,
Yeah.
commitments. When a China factory makes a commitment to a US buyer on quality, on price, on delivery time, today in 2025, I'm not talking about
Yeah.
20 years ago.
Hmm.
Today, they do care about their reputation. They do care about long-term relationships. Thus, 9 times out of 10, they're going to keep their commitment if they can. And when they do have a deviation on any one of those fronts, cost, quality, or speed, or lead time, they'll give you a heads up because they understand how to work with an American buyer professionally. India's not there yet. India is much more similar to where China was 15 or 20 years ago, in that not that it's unethical or immoral, nothing to do with that. It has to do with maturity and ability to control its own house, both in terms of its
Hmm.
own employees, its own costing, how it sources raw materials and components, how
Hmm.
exchange rate fluctuations, labor cost changes, holidays. So India is subject to a lot more variables, and the
Hmm.
Indian suppliers are less able to control outside variables. As such, sometimes the commitments made by an Indian supplier aren't as solid as those from a China supplier.
Right.
And finally, I'll talk about MOQs. China has built a whole industry around serving minimum order quantity or less than smaller quantities, 500 pieces, 1,000 pieces, and
Yeah.
figuring out a way to cost effectively and time effectively get that delivered. India's
Hmm.
not there yet. India deals with larger MOQs. They want to fill a 40-foot high cube container. Their costing is based upon that. They prefer one spec, one SKU. They can deal with two or three, but nothing less than 1,000 to 2,000 units of a particular spec. And even
Hmm.
then, they might balk at if the cost of producing the raw material or the subcomponent is too costly. So India is a lot more difficult to work with small quantities, if that makes sense. Now, if
Yeah.
you look at a Vietnam, just take everything I said about China, everything I said about India, and put it right in the middle because it's kind of half of each.
Mm.
It can handle MOQs on certain SKUs in certain industries, but not all.
Hmm.
It's a little bit more dependable than in India because it has its own source of raw materials and semi-finished components, some of it from China, some of it domestically. So Vietnam's somewhere in the middle, if that answers your question.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's great. That's great. Okay. What about the labor cost evolution? Because, Dan, we had a discussion in 2018 and we kind of compared and contrasted the labor cost in China. And at that time, I have this really old chart, right? At that time in 2018, labor cost in China was about $800 a month. Vietnam was at 475 a month, and India was at 200 a month with, productivity, factors making the equalized cost closer. How have these labor
Right.
costs and productivity factors changed by 2025? I mean, has the gap widened or narrowed in your view?
Well, first off, go back to that chart from what's that, 8 years, 7 years ago. I was
Yeah.
shocked how popular that chart I put together was, how often it was cited, because nobody had really, that I know of, had actually sat down and put a simple Excel spreadsheet and say, China, Vietnam, India, pure labor cost per human. Well, how many
Yes.
laborers do you need to make a widget per hour or per day? And
Yeah.
thus factoring in productivity, and then getting it to US dollar terms, obviously with exchange rate changes, and then looking
Yes.
at it on a per unit basis. So now, if I were to take that same chart and
Hmm.
update it till today, I'd say China today, which was at 800, is closer to $1,200 a month now.
Mm.
And productivity's gotten even better because of automation within the factory and better training. Um, Vietnam has gone from probably 475 US a month up to around $700 a month now.
Hmm.
And then India has increased the least from $200 a month up to around $300 a month now. However, keep your eye on the ball. India will be increasing much more quickly from a smaller base. So I wouldn't be surprised if next year it's in a $400 range. So
Mm.
again, China today, 1,200. Vietnam today, around seven, even 800. It depends on the industry.
Yeah.
And then India today, around 300, but quickly going up to 400. This does vary by industry.
Hmm.
If you're assembling an iPhone or a computer or something more high tech, you get
Hmm.
higher pay. If
Hmm.
you're working on
Hmm.
a manual sewing machine, you get lower pay, even though it's harder work, in my opinion.
I
And
see.
bear in mind as well the size of labor pool. China is already at its capacity on labor pool. It's not going to grow anymore. It's shrinking, especially those young, let's say 21-year-old male or female, um, coming from the hinterlands of China to a
Hmm.
coastal province focused on export type of production facility. There's a
Yeah.
less and less individuals in China who are willing to do that hard work.
Yes.
Cool. They're unwilling to eat the
Yes.
bitterness, right? That was
That's
their
right.
parents and grandparents who ate the bitterness. They're more focused
Yeah.
on real estate investments and getting better education. So China's labor pool has reduced. Vietnam, which if you look at its whole population is about the size of a large Chinese province at best, has a limited labor pool to begin with. So it's
Hmm.
already there with all the high tech moving into Vietnam. It's no longer cost affordable to make the textiles and the footwear in Vietnam. That's already moved out to Laos, Cambodia, and India and Bangladesh. India, on the other hand, still does have this quote unquote infinite labor pool, at least for the next 10 or 15 years, depending on industry and training. And if you're willing to pay the higher cost of wages, because cost of living in India has gone up as success and they move up the value chain, but it still does have a large labor pool. And that does play a factor as well.
Mm, I see. Recently, I've seen some videos of there's more automation technology being imported into India, and anecdotally, I heard that there were Indian like factory owners going to China for Canton Fair, not to buy product, but actually to buy equipment. Are you seeing a trend for in India moving towards automation? And I mean, is that something that's prevalent now in India?
Absolutely. It depends on the industry, though.
Hmm.
Basically, China machinery exports to India have been booming for the last 4 or 5 years.
Hmm.
Some of it is sustainable. It's going to keep going. A lot of that does have automated type of manufacturing because as labor costs in India keeps increasing, and with all the holidays and let's say inconsistent workforce, where you might have 20% of the workforce go out on Diwali or Holi or whatever holiday, and then the summer wedding season and the children's vacation season, elections, you name it, India
Hmm.
laborers tend to be a little, at this point in time, in 2025, not as reliable that you can count on them to come back after a holiday. A lot of them
Mm,
will skip and be poached by another factory or decide they don't want to do this anymore. As a
yeah.
result, the factory owners have to say, well, what am I going to do? I'm going to continually train and lose employees, which they have to do, and throw some automation in there as a stopgap for some of the unskilled labor work. So India does look at its factory workers as skilled and unskilled, and
Hmm.
some of the unskilled work could be replaced by automation, where you don't need a
Hmm.
technical hand to handle
Yeah.
a tool to that level of detail, whether it's moving product down an assembly line, whether it's some sort of simple assembly, which repetitive, which you can train a robot to do. Those
Hmm.
machines are indeed being employed early, or sometimes from Europe as well.
Hmm.
Um, but what I'm also finding is some of the Indian factories are buying the machinery on a regular basis and they appreciate that trade. Others are taking that machinery into India to reverse engineer it and make it locally. So you're finding both, which is quite
Yeah.
typical.
I see. Okay. And how about the productivity factor between China, Vietnam, and India? I mean, in 2018 on that chart, China productivity you scored it 1, Vietnam was 1.5, and India was 2.5. How do you see it today in 2025?
Not a huge difference because they've all moved up the productivity scale. China's
Hmm.
gotten even more efficient. Vietnam has
Hmm.
gotten a little bit more efficient. India's gotten a little bit more efficient. So it basically, everybody has improved.
Okay.
Thus, I wouldn't really change my ratios between those three countries as much. You need
Hmm.
1.5 Vietnamese workers to equate to one Chinese worker in terms of productivity. You need 2.5 Indian workers to equate to one Chinese worker in terms of productivity. I don't think
Yeah.
those ratios have changed that much in certain industries, labor intensive industries. If your
Hmm.
industry is less labor intensive, perhaps those numbers don't apply.
I see. All right. How about in terms of hidden champions? Are there any under the radar countries you think deserve more attention from small business owners looking to diversify their supply chain?
It's actually a question I look at all the time.
Hmm.
And when Trump administration initially hit India with a 26 or 27% additional tariff a month or so ago, I was scrambling. It's like, oh, wow, I moved out of
Yeah,
China, Vietnam into India to avoid all this. And here I
yeah,
am in India. I'm going to be facing the same concerns. So
yeah.
I looked everywhere from Saudi Arabia, because I'm in polypropylene woven bags, which
Hmm.
is oil based and labor intensive. So natural places to go would be a UAE, would be a Saudi Arabia, would be an Oman, would even be a Turkey.
Hmm.
And what I found through my investigations, even though they were subject to lower tariffs,
Hmm.
their labor costs were so high in compared to India,
Hmm.
it didn't make sense yet. It was getting closer. Had
Yeah.
India been hit with 35 or 40%, it would have made sense already. But
Hmm.
to your point about general product categories, I would
Hmm.
definitely keep Turkey on the radar, as well as Eastern Europe, countries of Romania, for example. I would look in
Hmm.
South America at Colombia, which has a free trade accord with the United States, or it had, I think it still does. And
Hmm.
don't forget about Taiwan.
Hmm.
Taiwan still has a very intelligent, well-educated, trained workforce.
Yeah.
That some of it's employed up in mainland China right now that can come back to Taiwan, the middle level
Hmm.
managers to retrain its workforce. So Taiwan still has the capability to produce product. And I
Hmm.
also would not rule out Indonesia. Um, I lived in Indonesia back, whoa, what's that, about 30 something years ago, 40 years ago. No, 30, 70 something years ago. I'm not aging myself here. And back
Wow.
then, Indonesia's textile business was booming. Garments was
Hmm.
booming. It had
Hmm.
it still has a young, uh, um, artisan, skilled workforce who was willing to do this type of work with a
Hmm.
gigantic population. I think they're like fifth largest population in the world, give or take. So
Yeah.
don't rule out Indonesia as well as somewhere to diversify to other than an India or a Bangladesh or a Vietnam. I would not rule out
Hmm.
Indonesia.
Okay. When you say Taiwan, Dan, what type of product categories do you mean? Like mainly electronics, or what do you
Yeah,
say?
I mean you're looking at higher end items, of course, because of the
Yeah.
labor cost. Unless you're
Hmm.
mostly automation, which Taiwan does have a lot of automated plants, you're
Hmm.
really looking at higher tech items where labor cost is less of a factor. Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. And how about cultural navigation? What are the biggest cultural differences you notice when negotiating with factories in different Asian countries?
Um, if I the first thing I would do is talk about similarities. What I mean
Hmm.
by that is when I myself am representing my American company and visiting a factory in China, Vietnam, India, or anywhere, it's really a one-on-one relationship. I'm
Yeah.
I'm the one who's meeting the person on the other side of the room. We have to build a rapport in the first place, a trusting rapport. A,
Yeah.
I'm not going to BS you. You're not going to BS me. We can trust each other's credibility.
Hmm.
B, what are we both bringing to the party? I'm obviously bringing purchase orders, and hopefully the type of purchase orders on a steady basis that they desire. And they're
Hmm.
bringing to me a quality product at a fair price at a reasonable lead time. So that's
Hmm.
what each party is bringing to the table. As long as we're explicitly clear with one another and consistent on that, you have a basis of a good relationship. Now,
Hmm.
when you talk about culture, that's culture blind. You have to start from there. Now, when
Hmm.
you get into cultures, I do find, for example, in China, when I had a lot of operations in Jiangsu and mostly southern Jiangsu province and central and eastern Shandong province, where most of my factories were,
Hmm.
sometimes I didn't have enough cargo to fill a 40-foot high cube container. So I would do a milk run where I would take a 40-foot high cube, bring it from a Qingdao, truck it empty all the way to Zibo in central Shandong. I would load, let's just say, 25 pallets at factory A. I would ship it back to Jiaozhou towards Qingdao and load up the rest of the pallets to make a 48 pallet shipment, for example. Seal the
Hmm.
container, send it to port, and on its way to North America.
Hmm.
Those two factories were willing to work with one another and my forwarder to trust each other, not to sabotage each other's pallets, to spy on what's in the other pallets. It didn't matter to them because they were both key suppliers of mine and we were all played well together.
Yeah.
I can't do that in India. I can't do that in India. Indian
Really?
companies do not play well with one another. They're hyper competitive, hyper
Mm,
paranoid, don't trust anybody. They come up with 1,001 excuses why it can't be done. And the only way
hmm
to get it done would be to use a neutral CFS at the port, where each has to deliver their pallets directly to the port as less than truckload. I pay out the you know what to cover the cost of that freight forwarding operation at the port. That's the only way I can make it happen, and that's cost prohibitive for my product category.
mm,
Um, so basically, you can't do factory direct consolidations. And in China, for example, I had times where factory A was overloaded with orders. They knew I worked well with factory B. They would sometimes cooperate using each other's labor pools to finish an order for me,
hmm
knowing it was in my best interest with my approval, and it
Yeah.
always worked. You cannot do that in India. They don't trust each other's fabric. They don't trust each other's raw material. They don't trust each
Mm,
other's accounting. It's too complex. And the government doesn't help because of tax laws, making it even more difficult, even if they could get it done. So those are two big cultural differences, I would say, between trying to get um, outside the box solutions done in China versus India. It's much easier in China to get those things done. More
yeah.
rigid in India.
Yeah, 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 very interesting. Okay. Kind of shifting gears a little bit with factory relationships and QC. I know this is really important for a lot of e-commerce sellers. Like in terms of relationship building, what's your approach to building strong relationships that lead to better quality, priority treatment, better terms?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned in your last question, building my rapport with the managing director and the commercial director of each factory is critical, right? You have
Yeah.
to have relationships where when you know what hits the fan, I can get
Yeah.
on WhatsApp or a phone call to either the managing director or the sales manager and say,
Yeah.
"This is serious. You got to fix it," and they will jump because they realize I don't call on a bluff. I don't call them on say I need your help, but once a quarter they better jump through hoops. Otherwise, I know they're not reliable. So
Yeah.
being transparent in terms of what's critical to me and what are my priorities, me, as opposed to my staff on a day-to-day level, is very important to establish the hotline. I'm calling you because I need help. You will do something for me because I don't ask it often. That's part
Yeah.
of the basis of our relationship.
Yeah.
Um, I will also, it's a quid pro quo. I'll make it clear to them. If you do what I ask and handle my orders in the priority I've requested it, and it's more important than your other customers, I will pay you back with loyalty. I will give you more orders. I will move away the type of SKUs that you find less productive and less profitable. I will try
hmm
to build a customer base of SKUs that you like and the quantities you like. The better you treat me, the better I'll treat you. I'll spoil you because you're taking
hmm
really good care of me. So it's basically that's part of it to read each
Yeah.
other, to understand what each other's drivers are, and to meet those needs from both sides. I try to just spend a lot of time because I do have a black belt in Lean Six Sigma from USC, Fight on Trojans, and thus I use that experience and that training to walk into a factory to help the factory cut cost.
Mm.
There's been so many times where I've found a sewing worker at a factory sitting idle, waiting for the fabric from the prior stage to be delivered to their workstation. And I'm sitting there just watching it. And I will just sit down or stand against the wall and just watch and look at my
hmm
watch and say, oh, wow, that's been 3 minutes for that worker just sitting there.
hmm
Because number one, it's a waste of labor. Number
hmm
two, it's unhealthy. The worker themselves, part of their compensation might be on a per unit basis as well. They're not
Yeah.
happy just sitting there. So I'll share those observations directly with the managing director and say, what the heck's going on here? And what are you doing to fix it? And based upon the reaction from that managing director, I'll know if I'm dealing with somebody sharp or somebody who's oblivious because you can't let that happen, especially on a regular basis. Does it happen? Of course it happens, but you got to
hmm
be aware of it and be able to pivot. For example,
Yeah.
in my product, we have different type of sewing machines. Some that's suitable for a circular bag, some are suitable for a four-panel bag. I'm not going to get too technical on you, but there's
Yeah.
different type of sewing training that goes on. So you want to make sure that your sewers are able to pivot from this type of SKS product to this type of product, so that when this one slows down, you can shift them to another line. Same true is for most type of production. You can't have somebody singularly trained for one type of product only, because what if there's a lack of orders in that product or there's a delay in upstream, you can shift them to another product. So what I
Yeah.
try to educate my factories that I work closely with on areas of muda or waste where they need to improve upon within their factory. Um, I'm also very careful to not trust anybody. So I use various sources like data mine, for example, to understand who else my factory is selling to, which of my competitors. And I do a lot. I mean, I do Gemba walks. I do visits to my factories in India 5 times a year. I'm all over the factories. Although I
Mm,
live in Portugal now, you'll
mhm,
find me every 6 to 8 weeks in a factory in Ahmedabad or in Sabasa walking the plant. And I always make it a point to walk into the warehouses and keep an
mhm,
eye on which of my competitors they're also dealing with. And
mm,
that's critical information because you want to know who else they have relationships with. And if that's a
yeah.
key competitor of mine, I'm
Mm,
immediately going to tell the managing director, you do realize you're playing with fire, right? Because that's my key competitor. So you're gonna
mm.
have to make a decision of which one of us you want to dance with, because you can't dance with both of us.
Do you have non-compete signed with those suppliers?
No, I don't have to, because
Mm,
we happen to be a big fish in a small pond. We're a bigger player in the commodity we deal in.
mm,
So my uh, gentle threat is typically
mhm.
enough. Look, it's
Yeah,
your choice. You do what you think is best for your company. But if you don't behave this way, I can pull my orders and go elsewhere. I have options.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
enough.
yeah,
It
yeah.
doesn't have to be a non-compete. I don't look at contracts as being as valuable as purchase orders. And what am I going
Yeah.
to do with those purchase orders? That's more
Mhm.
valuable.
Yeah, that's great advice. All right. I know we're running out of time. Let's kind of look into the future. I
Okay.
mean, you gave your 90-day prediction, but if, based on your experience, if we were to look a little further out the next 3 to 5 years, how do you see the whole global manufacturing landscape evolving?
I'm less optimistic on WTO as a multilateral platform. What does that
Hmm.
mean? There's going to be more bilateral deals. There's going to
Hmm.
be more of the US UK deal, the US India deal. Um, that type of one-on-one bilateral trade deals. You're going to see more onshoring where it's possible. Uh,
Hmm.
Even though I'm not hugely optimistic about US labor skyrocketing on manufacturing or assembling inexpensive Christmas good type of items, I do
Hmm.
think with automation, you will see more US based manufacturing with or without increased labor. It could be machines doing it. So you're going to find more onshoring. You're going to find more nearshoring, whether that's Mexico or further south in Latin America, and more friend shoring, like an India type of relationship. Um,
Hmm.
so you will see, that's my prediction for the next few years, is more that type of thing. And not just the United States. Europe will be more reliant on the eastern part of Europe and southern part of Europe as opposed to dealing from China. China is going to lose some market share in United States and Europe. China is going to export more to Latin America and Africa as those markets grow. And within Asia itself is already selling a lot to Asia. That's going to keep increasing. So you're going to find more regionalization of global trade.
Interesting. Okay. And what about technology? How's technology changing manufacturing and sourcing in Asia? Are there any innovations you're excited about? For example, are you using AI being more implemented?
AI is a very valuable tool. Not on its own, it still needs a human to operate it and interpret it. And I don't think that's going to go away. But I think AI will will prevent some errors, to more clerical type of errors. It will identify trends and alert you to, hey, I'm seeing this as a common issue. Maybe we should focus on that and give you advice, almost like a consultant or a Jiminy Cricket speaking into your ear and
Hmm.
identify opportunities for you. I think you're going to see more cloud type of integration between buyer and seller, where the buyer
Hmm.
will have more insights into what's happening today on the production line. You're going to see more live camera operations going on. So as a buyer, you can monitor your QC inspectors inspection as it goes on live and alert them and speak into their ear and saying, wait, go back to that unit again. I don't like how that color looked. Can you zoom in for me? You're going to
Hmm.
find more control because of 5G and 6G type of technology and increasing speed so that somebody in a remote country can observe what's going on and have more input live, real time.
Hmm. Excellent. All right. Dan, I know we're right about out of time, so I want to thank you again for your great advice. I'm always about the 80/20 rule, like that, the Pareto's principle, as I think you're familiar with. So if you were to distill down everything we covered today, what would be the number one recommendation you'd like to leave our audience with?
Be agile. There's going to be so many disruptions coming your way, like a tornado in your face. And if you're not ready to react to whatever comes next, and nobody knows what's coming next, but be ready for whatever's coming next by knowing you have contingency plans in place. For example, I'll give you a perfect example to close with, Gary.
Yeah.
About less than 2 weeks ago, here I am in Lisbon, Portugal.
Mm-hmm.
I think it was on a Monday, and
Mm-hmm.
it was around 11 a.m. We lost all power. I thought it was my apartment, so I checked my fuse box. Then I found
Yeah.
out, oh, the whole building's down. Then I found out, oh crap, all of Lisbon's down. Then, because telecommunications hadn't gone down yet, we
Yeah.
realized it was Portugal and Spain. The whole Iberian Peninsula had gone down. Now,
Wow.
the first thing I did before I lost communication, because my phone was still working, not my Vodafone, my local Portuguese SIM card went dead on me, but I still had my US T-Mobile on my eSIM on my same iPhone. I
Yeah.
switched over to that, immediately called my wife, who was in Netherlands at the time, to say, everything is fine here, but I think me and the dog are about to lose communication. Don't be nervous. Number one. Then I called Chicago, my headquarters. Hey, here I am in Portugal. Everything is fine, but I'm about to lose communication. So I had to pivot on a dime to alert critical people in my life, both professionally
Yeah.
and personally, that I'm about to communication wise go blackout mode. So
Mm.
you have to make decisions on your own, but don't worry about me, but don't depend on me. So those
Yeah.
are the type of things we're all going to have to be dealing with on a much more rapid pace of
Yeah.
contingency plans. So try to think with your key reports and your superiors, what if scenarios, and have those written out and even practiced so that when something happens, you kind of already know the move of what's going to happen when that disruption happens. Be ready for anything.
Yeah. Kind of like a black swan type thing, something unexpected out of the blue. You gotta be prepared, you gotta be agile, pivot quickly.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly.
Yeah.
It's going to happen. It's going to happen. It's going to happen more often. So be ready for it
Yeah.
as best you can.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Dan. And for people that want to follow you or, possibly connect, what's a good way for people to follow you?
Add me on LinkedIn. Gary has, you can see my name there in the bottom. I think it's Daniel Krassenstein. I use my full formal name. Add me on
Yeah.
LinkedIn. I pretty much add anybody if you're in supply chain. Feel free to
Okay.
pop me a message and
Yeah.
we can take it from there.
Yeah. Excellent. We'll link it up below in the show notes. So, Dan, thank you again. I learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else did too. And thank you everybody for joining us. Good luck with all of the disruptions out there. And we'll see everybody at the next session. Bye, everyone.
Bye, buddy. Good to see you, Gary.